So we've both done work with Major League Baseball and did some work with Absolute and the Pirates. Turned out to be really good. And it's interesting in having discussions, right? And specifically discussions that are all centered around programming,
Hmm.
right? So it's like, hey, how are we programming for this athlete, for that athlete, et cetera, right? And
Hmm.
programming, think of programming as kind of like the grand unifier, right? So like if you have to program, you have to program in the clinic, it's just in real time,
Yeah, definitely. You got to
right?
program on your feet.
You got to program, yeah, for sure, which we can get into that reiterative feedback loop maybe. But but essentially trying to kind of unite everyone that's on a performance staff under the umbrella of perform programming and then under the umbrella of getting an athlete to point B, right? Because once we get the athlete to point B, we're essentially all of the stuff that we're doing for the four elements of point B starts to become a feedback loop that now we're like, okay, these numbers now mean something very important to us,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
this is stuff that I know we've both done. I've done it extensively in the NFL with a bunch of different players where it's like, hey, this is your point B. And now all of the programming starts to stay in that area, right? And we start to and then that's when you really start to have a lot of fun with programming because, athletes will say, hey, I'm having an issue when I go to run a slant route. These guys don't see enough hip disassociation. And I don't get that like half a second breakaway, right? I'm getting guarded. So I want more hip joint function stuff or I want more like I need more speed, right? Like these athletes are now they have agency in their programming, which really gets that buy-in and all that stuff, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But anyway, the point of us kind of going through this is it's like, you know, we get asked all the time, like, hey, well, what is point B? Right? And it's funny because it's like and it's worth a conversation, right? But like we only know what point B is through the athletes that we've worked with, through like all of their, essentially point A, what we would say their point A. And for people that, so point A is like our initial like feedback loop or where we start programming with. So it's kind of like, how I say it like is, like, if you go to the coffee shop, right? If you say, hey, we're going to meet at this coffee shop. Well, in order for you to give me directions, you need to know where I'm at.
Correct.
So point A is where I'm at. Point B is the coffee shop. Okay. And the roadmap is literally the roads that you take to get there. Right. And like anything else, there's a lot of different routes that you can take to get there. That's why we utilize
Certainly.
conjugate. Right. We're not
Correct.
stuck in linear. We're going, hey, like, listen, if your roads are leading to point B, like, show us what they are. Yeah, this all makes sense. So that point B, it's interesting when people start to ask, and like most of my programming experience is more like football, bodybuilding, like stuff like this. It's not really like baseball, right? But it kind of got me thinking because when we're there, it's like, well, this dude is like unbelievable. And then as I'm starting to pay attention to his data, I'm like, this guy is at point B, clearly. Like
Which guy are you talking about?
Paul Skenes, their pitcher, right? Like you know more baseball than I do. I mean, you're literally like right there in Toronto, right? So it's like, but it's like you would agree from a programming standpoint, right? Which is why we wrote that article is so that it's like people can start to correlate and say like, hey, from a programming perspective, this is what point B looks like for Paul Skenes.
Hmm.
Now, you'll probably see that if you can assess like a lot of different high level pitchers, you'll start to see, hey, there's this kind of convergence. Hey, they all have this, they all have that. Hey, when we go into joint function, this is kind of what they have. When we go into reactive strength, this is what they have. When we go into absolute, right, you'll start to see parallels from all of that data where it starts to turn into information that then we can take as knowledge for programming.